Howdy, folks. Welcome to another episode of PineCreek's Propaganda. So with this episode, I'm going to be going into this one, or at least I'm recording this one. I'm going into this one without having seen it in advance, but this is a snippet from Pine Creek, probably of a larger conversation that he had with the young man in the corner of Doug's video. There is Nathan from or he's going by Nice Wonder Farms here, but his YouTube channel is Digital Gnosis, and I'm going to have links to this available in the description, so you can click on his channel and you can find the original video of this. So I'm not exactly sure which live hangout this is from, because that's usually how Doug makes his stuff. He'll take out a part and then create a video that he posts up publicly after a long live one, one of his 2 or 3 or 4 hour hangs. And so at some point, Nathan decided to call in. So I'm going into this one without really knowing in advance what they're going to do, but the title of this that Pine Creek gave, How to Know If You're Marginalized, Step-by-Step Guide. So let's see what happens.
It's such a small issue. It's like, why do we even care about trans people, right?
Well, I think you know why, right? Because it's very easy to sling hate at marginalized people, and particularly if you can get people to feel very emotional about.
What's a marginalized person?
A community that is already misunderstood.
It sounds like he sped this up for the recording, for his, because it sounds like it's at about 1.25 speed. I didn't do that, so for anybody who's like adjusting playback speed on their own, the original source video here has been sped up.
Understood, derided, hated.
You're describing me.
I don't think I am. Not by society. Not by society at large.
So, like ethnic, the EC word. I don't want to use it too early in this one. Doug is now talking about like, oh, he's marginalized. I guess he understands what marginalized means. He doesn't. So I'm going to slip right into something more comfortable here. Kind of a definition of it. So marginalized generally when it's being used refers to individuals or groups or communities that are excluded from full participation in social, economic, political life, cultural life too. And usually when they're referring to the marginalization, they're talking about systemic. It's a systemic kind of exclusion from full participation in those portions of society. It can result from institutional barriers. It can come from just good old-fashioned racism, discrimination from other people. There can be structural inequalities by virtue of certain laws or the way they're enforced. And it's usually based on, the big characteristics: gender, race, class status, disabilities, etc. So I went and did a search for this and found out that there are some, they're in technical and academic contexts. Marginalization is framed a couple of ways, and this is more nuanced than we probably need, but I wanted to do this. There's sociological, political, and economic theories for marginalization. So, and even one for public health. So sociology and social theory, marginalization describes a process where dominant groups relegate certain populations to the periphery of society, denying them access to resources, power, and opportunities. What does that sound like? That sounds like what Doug supports we do with trans individuals. In political science, marginalized groups often have limited political representation and influence, which perpetuates systemic inequality. I think Doug is probably for that when it comes to certain people, because he will usually use the kind of simplified, well, these people are talking about their feelings and we don't need to deal with that. We need to talk about the hard facts and the hard truths and stuff like that, even though actually what's causing some of the hard feelings on the sides of certain people are actual facts that we need to deal with. Economic marginalization occurs when individuals or communities lack access to stable employment, financial services, or equitable economic participation. I think this is happening more and more with things like the gig economy. I would argue that this is happening, and in large part due to people just sort of selecting it themselves. But it was, I mean, there was an enormous amount of PR dedicated to running down collective bargaining, unions. Nothing united a group of workers like the idea that they collectively bargain for their own collective benefit together. And instead, we as a culture sort of, and right-wing conservatives that were anti-union, anti-collective bargaining, leaned into this and pitched ideas about individual assent, twisted the notion of self-reliance, which generally is a good thing, and turned it into an every man for himself kind of mentality. And you kind of see that playing out with voters of all stripes, but specifically, even when they're talking about the sort of working class voters and the reasons why they would vote for somebody like Trump, the undercurrent of that seems to be kind of an angry, resentful, I'm going to get mine regardless of who I got to step over kind of thing. And union participation, I think, is at the lowest it's been ever. I think it's still below 10%. I think it's like 7%. And then there's obviously public health, which there's marginalization there because as well. A great example of marginalized individuals in public health would be, one that comes to mind would be communities in Appalachia, predominantly poor, predominantly rural, predominantly white, I believe, if the demographics break down the way I think. And the second would be for public health marginalization. And these are just two examples, there's many others, would be Black women who, childbearing Black women, run an incredibly high risk of mortality and permanent health degradation in the country compared to other groups. It is incredibly risky to be a pregnant Black woman, just based on the statistics. So that kind of gets it in. And then there's like different aspects of this, like the sociology and social theory, the political science of it, economics. But normally anything like this is probably going to upset Doug, because he's going to think that this is an excuse dragging people away from the real conversation, which is you get what you deserve, you make your own mistakes, you made your bed, you lie in it, you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, shake it off, scrape them off, you're better off, plow ahead. It's a dog eat dog world out there. It's sink or swim. I mean, have I gone through enough, just sort of insipid versions of it? But I mean, these are probably going to come up with Doug. So if I landed on them, you owe me a Coke.
Okay, sorry, I was being facetious. Go ahead. You said a marginalized person is someone.
If you came out though, Doug, no.
A marginalized person is someone who's been derided and what?
For example, someone who is statistic. So I mean, you're going to want a more precise criteria here.
No,
so
I'll be easy on you.
Statistically, more at risk of violent crime against them. Someone who there might be laws discriminating against them in various ways. Someone who might be discriminated against in terms of like job applications or mortgage applications or something like that. So we can kind of operationalize it that way.
So that would include some white people who don't get jobs because they're white?
It probably wouldn't be because they're white, but it would be based on their class. Like I said, one of the things that might make that difficult, if you're dealing with somebody who looks, like a moonshiner from Appalachia, and you can still run into people like that, and they go into a job interview dressed in, like they just walked off, walked just came down from the hills, they probably would be discriminated against. Yeah, that happens. Or if you're a member of the clown community and you try to get an interview at the hedge fund, but the only formal wear you got is your clown suit and wig, yeah, they're going to discriminate against you pretty big.
Potentially, yeah.
Oh, so white people can be marginalized. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, anyone could be in principle marginalized.
Yeah, Doug's learning something. Marginalization is not just based on race. It's also based on things like class. Something that Doug, as a kind of paleo-conservative or whatever he is, does not want to talk about.
Yes.
Okay.
Like you could people could be marginalized for any random reason that you could describe about them.
I agree. Kind of takes away the.
Doug is actively seeking the marginalization of multiple populations in the country, like the marginalization of trans people and the marginalization of immigrants for whatever, for any reason, even if it's to say, like, if it's legal, he frequently will approach us with questions like, well, who do you let in? Everything else is equal about these two guys, but one is poor and the other one has $1 million. So who does he want to marginalize here? If he's picking who comes in, or he wants to know who you're going to marginalize if you're sitting there, he wants to make sure you marginalize the poor. I think, according to Doug, he would have a hard time dealing with this because I think he believes marginalization is not only justifiable, but it's righteous. Certain groups and certain individuals have it coming to them.
The value of the word, though, right?
No, I don't think so, because we're talking about describing who is actually marginalized against, not who, like in principle. It's like saying, I don't know, if John across the road robbed you, and then we said, yeah, but in principle, anyone could rob you, right? Like you wouldn't go. So that takes away the value of you.
So can we look at someone's skin color and determine if they're marginalized or not, or do we need more information?
Well, that is some information that will that has some predictive accuracy. So we should sort of update based on that information. But I think the question that you're asking is how much of an update is that? Or
like if you see someone on the
he's also being a little intentionally stupid here about that. If you're looking at an individual, like, can you figure out to what degree they individually are marginalized? No, not without getting to know them individually. Can you safely take a guess that given given their skin color, that they may be more marginalized than, say, another group? Yeah, statistically, you can. The numbers bear that out. I don't think Doug would have a problem with this if, say, somebody, if you're comparing how two people would be treated walking into a job interview, and one of them is wearing a cross and the other one is wearing a hijab. Which one does he think in the United States is most likely to be marginalized or maybe treated with a little bit more, they need to go away. And that's just a religious distinction. And, the person with a cross necklace may not even really be a Christian, but it's a safety thing.
Street, just based on their skin color, can you tell if they're marginalized or not?
I think
this is a silly question. Can you tell if they individually are marginalized? That's not what you're talking about when you're talking about marginalization. Marginalization is about communities and groups. Trying to shift it to, do you know if Todd's marginalized? Well, what do you mean? Well, Todd's black, but Todd's rich. Okay. So if Todd's black and Todd's rich, then it follows that Todd's not marginalized. Therefore, all blacks aren't marginalized. That does not follow. And I think that's what Doug's trying to do.
In terms of what you should believe, what are you asking me when you ask me, can we tell? Are you saying, can I never get it wrong?
No, I'm asking, would that be a good assumption or a good thing to say, a good reasonable thing to say? I see a black person.
It wouldn't be a reasonable thing to say, because you're not going to do what he's doing right there. Hey, that guy, John over there, he's marginalized, right? Why do you say that? Well, he's black.
On the street, they're marginalized. Is that fair? Or
I reckon it should probably tilt you, if you know nothing else about them other than their skin color, it should probably tilt you 60% towards marginalized.
Okay. So when people look at my son, they should 60% say,
if they know nothing else about him, they should initially think that, yeah. When they find out that, the dad lives in a gated community in Arizona, then they should probably become, way less, down to like 30%.
Okay. And when you see a white person on the street, it's not 60% marginalized, it's what?
I mean, the problem is, just to stay in terms of what we're imagining here, right? Like, we're imagining that a scenario where we have no other information,
right,
which is very unrealistic. If you imagine that you're in Detroit or something and you see a white person, maybe you're going to think this person is probably actually quite poor. And so the point is that the contextual information is going to play a role. Similarly, if you're in like a gated community, or if you're in like the richest part of New York or something and you see a black person, then probably that update from them being black isn't going to do a whole lot, right? Because there's other information.
So we shouldn't base whether someone's marginalized or not just simply based on skin color.
I think he's covered that. Is Doug just having a little bit of an oxygen deprivation moment here?
Not simply based on that, though. That, like I said, if we're making
guesses,
it can help, but we probably shouldn't rely on it.
It's some information, and it depends at what scale we're talking.
There's a very easy way of doing this. Like when I put this in, I don't think Nathan's doing a bad job. I think he's trying to have a conversation with somebody who is proud to be a moron. If you're looking at this from like something, more academic, and you're talking or less tangible, like psychologically, who's marginalized or whatever based on the culture, it can be a little bit harder to pin down. But not only does he understand marginalization, that's not the issue. He understands it. Where the rubber's going to meet the road here is going to be the fact that Nathan is approaching this from the understanding that being marginalized, a marginalized community, they're not in a good spot. And Doug is going to make excuses for the fact that, because he tends to be contrarian like this, what's wrong with marginalization? Maybe they did something to deserve it. Maybe they should be kept over there. Maybe those Appalachians should stay on the hills and just make their moonshine and die young, sometimes from tooth disease, Let's just keep it at that. This is going to be problematic for him, because the last thing he's going to want to do is try to approach this situation. He's going to think that marginalization as a concept in its study is left wing, and then from there try to figure out a way to spin the opposite of its connotation into a positive. You guys are talking about marginalization as if it's bad. He understands this. If he found out that one of his kids ends up in, I don't know the neighborhoods of major major towns in cities in Arizona, but pick one. Pick a neighborhood in Tucson, pick a neighborhood in the greater Phoenix, Tempe, Mesa metroplex, and find one that's tough, one that's really kind of rough. Majority rental properties, and not a lot of people. You don't have a lot of people that are owning there, living paycheck to paycheck. Odds are, if one of his kids ended up there, he's probably going to be thinking like, well, on the positive side, they're starting out, but they're not going to end there. They're going to work their way up. Or if there's something happens and they end up there, that's bad. He's going to understand what marginalization means for one of his kids if they either end up there. Now maybe they need help from him or the community, or he doesn't want it from the government, but or they're also marginalized if they start there, in a sense, right? Because they're young and they're starting out and they're not going to have, and a lot of this is kind of accepted in a lot of ways, just culturally, like, well, there's certain things as a young person just starting out, maybe you shouldn't have access to. And Americans used to be kind of crazy about this. I remember talking to people, good salt of the earth, middle-class people. They worked for, one of the car companies here in the Mitten State. And their concept was, you know what, when you're young, it is tough, and maybe you're working two jobs and maybe you don't have the health insurance yet, as if that was okay. Right. But they would kind of justify that marginalization because, like, the fact that you didn't have the same participation in healthcare or in the job market based on your age and a lack of experience relative to somebody who's, an adult or middle-aged or older, then it should be expected that you should have to sit out certain things. You wait your turn. We do this kind of stuff all the time. The trick is how you're balancing that. This nuance is not going to matter, because again, my prediction is Doug is looking for a way to turn marginalization into a plus, as long as it doesn't directly affect him, or he can ignore it when it comes to his kids.
About as well. So, for example, if we're talking at the population level, then that is probably going to be an effect that that's probably going to be a category that we can find effects in that can drive things like, policy nudges that we might want to put in place or things like that. Even if at the individual level, it might be, very bad information, at the population level, it might be very good information.
Policy like DEI?
Policy like DEI.
So when we're looking if we really care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we shouldn't just base it on skin color. We should get to know the context, right?
That is the point of DEI. I don't know. When he does this kind of stuff, it makes me wonder, like, does he understand this better than he thinks? Or does he really think that the left opponents, the liberal opponents that he's talking about, are really this stupid and this shallow? No one said diversity, equity, and inclusion is just about race. No one said that. They didn't put that out that way. Doug has internalized this because the straw man coming from a lot of right-wing sources is to describe DEI as reverse racism. What you're going to do is select individuals who are non-white and provide them preference for jobs and positions of authority and power. Despite the merit of white people out there. That's what you're going to do. That's what DEI is really about. And it's not. It also is supposed to take into account gender differences. I mean, like I said, this is well known. Affirmative action, the biggest group that benefited from affirmative action, and I would argue it's probably the same too for DEI, because DEI is based on creating programs and an awareness to encourage employers to consider the broadest possible pool of applicants and to try to dismiss things that might prevent them from really looking at the value of that person based on things like merit. The idea is to make sure that diversity and merit are going hand in hand, that you are not using diversity as a way to club merit or saying, no, I just want the stats. We got this person and that's all we need. Cold hard facts. Like, it is a balancing act. And it is based on taking into account people from different classes, different backgrounds, rural, urban, different races, different religions, different countries. I'm pretty sure, despite the fact that he is a relatively recent immigrant here, that this America should just be for Americans. I think he would be fighting alongside Daniel Day-Lewis's, the butcher character in Gangs of New York. Get those Italians and Irish out of here. They don't belong here. They're not real Americans. You weren't born here. How dare you?
It depends. I think in the context of like population level policy, that DEI policy can encourage like social mobility in a way that a policy of purely individual based, whatever that's supposed to mean, policy wouldn't. And I think that part of that is going to be because individual based policy actually becomes a reflection of the norms of power that are already in place, which would be white faculty having a bias towards white students or people with names like them and things like that, rather than evaluating merit.
Like, would my son qualify for DEI?
I don't think so.
Everybody qualifies for DEI, so I disagree with both of them there. Everybody is considered in terms of DEI. DEI even applies to somebody like Doug. He's an older, middle-aged white guy and he's follicularly challenged. So there are people that might discriminate against him because he's got some genetic problems, right? He's got some obvious deficiencies in his health. He's missing some hair. I suffer from the same issue. I'm also overweight. I think Doug might be a little bit overweight himself, but I don't know. But you can be discriminated against because you're fat. There's other medical reasons that people can use. And so the purpose of DEI is to encourage people to look past that and to evaluate the whole person and not just find ways to make excuses based on race or gender or medical condition or background or something that's more or less irrelevant to that. So this is kind of goofy here, what he's trying to say. I have been critical of DEI multiple times in my videos because cynically it can be applied by corporations in two ways. One is a way to simply dodge the liabilities that come with laws from the government about like, you will do this, you will do that, those kinds of things. And so if they feel like, okay, well, individuals now have the ability to sue us on the grounds of they discriminated against me because of my gender or my race or my background or my class, whatever. We want to avoid that kind of litigiousness. So we're going to establish DEI markers to make sure that we have the kind of environment where cards on the table, we take this, we respect those differences, but we're not taking those into consideration to include or exclude people from different jobs. We're looking at your participation in the group and the quality of your work and the merit. That's generally how it's presented. The other one is to sort of present it as a way of, as I presented to other people, it can be something of a liberal dodge. The notion that liberals are very keen on doing DEI is that they believe in capitalism and they want the government to be in a position to create a playing field that allows as many people as possible to participate in the great game of capitalism, right? To whereas people who are more less inclined towards humanism and more obsessed with the notion of the game itself believe a savage, brutal, no holds bar approach should be that, and that competition is about exclusivity and it's about excluding people. And if you can start winnowing those people out from the very beginning by developing heuristics to say these people are less than, these people are weaker than, they are less desirable for reasons A, B, and C, you can just get them out of your way. There is kind of an implicit cultural and political dissonance between capitalism, if you allow your imagination to take capitalism to its most vicious endpoint, and DEI support coming from liberals who want to maintain both systems. They want a kinder, gentler, inclusive system that allows more people to ultimately be able to compete against each other in ways where the real capitalist really wants to turn that capitalism game into something a lot more brutal and a lot more bloodthirsty and a lot and no mercy, no safety net. That's usually where I am concerned about how this is being applied in the community. Generally speaking, though, even at its most perfunctory, DEI is, I think, usually kind of positive, at least as a reminder to people to, basically let go of your hangups and try to deal with these people, dealing with your coworkers and your employees and your employers based on your relationship to the work, based on relationship to each other, and trying to develop an environment of shared and mutual respect because you have differences, because you can kind of appreciate those differences. And if you can't, well, you just, calm down. So let's play this out here and see where this goes.
Because I think it's often. I don't know a lot about how it's done in the US, but I can only talk in the UK context. But on your typical kind of like demographic survey in the UK, you have.
And I am kind of curious about this because I'm the exact opposite. I kind of know how DEI is applied, at least as a civil servant, and in some circumstances in the private sector here. But I don't know how DEI is a kind of presented to your average worker, or in Nathan's case, I think he's still in school. He's an academic. I believe he's pursuing his PhD. So yeah, this can be informative. Let's see where he goes here.
This is where intersectionality is important. You have a number of metrics that at the population level are highly predictive of bad outcomes.
My son has it the worst because not only is he black, but he's not even considered black because of his daddy.
Well, one of the criteria that they would take into account in the UK, for example, would be the educational level of your parents, and also like the job role of your parents. Like, do they have like a clerical role, or do they have?
I don't want to let that escape because I do want to point that Doug is trying to again turn this into an opportunity to troll. As soon as Nathan gets more serious, then obviously the opportunity now is to say, oh, well, my kid, he's not even considered really, Marginalization is not about individual. This is about access to and participation in aspects of society. Are you being excluded from certain jobs? Are you being excluded from certain healthcare options? Are you being excluded from certain political realities? These kinds of this kind of stuff happens. If Doug wants to deny that, he just has to explain why there's nothing wrong with redlining in the financial world. And if he can explain that, then we can, okay. Because one of the I find it fascinating. It's one of those things that you just throw that out there to somebody who wants to deny systemic racism, make fun of critical race theory like Doug usually does, but he doesn't understand what it is. He thinks it's a money-making grift, which is hilarious. Or try to say that DEI is actually about policing individual attitudes. There are people out there that could be racist to his son in both directions. Okay. But that's not what DEI is about. DEI is not about changing your heart. You can still be kind of an asshole deep down. There's nothing we can do about Doug in his heart and brain. That's going to come around later or maybe never. The purpose of DEI, usually at a corporate level, is like, these are the rules we play by. These are the rules we expect you to play by. And if you don't want to, maybe you need to find something else to do. It seems kind of simple to me. But I'm not done.
Like a managerial role, or do they like run businesses themselves? And you piece together more of an informative picture based off of more and more of these sorts of
So
details.
it sounds like
Even
class. It sounds that more like economic class status would be better than skin color then.
Basically, but skin color is being used as a proxy for that. But yeah, I mean, if you want to say it's all really just class warfare, and that the bourgeois need to rise up against.
Again, he's still kind of missing it. DEI, like the reason this stuff ends up getting distilled down to just being about skin color, especially in the United States, is because the right always makes it about race, because it's the most inflammatory. They're usually race baiting in this sense. The last thing they're going to talk about is whether or not we really need to tolerate people from other classes. I mean, everybody's just middle class in the United States. No, they're not.
Against the capitalist class. If those are your words, Doug, I won't stop.
Well, no, you admitted it. You said economic class is better than skin color, right? You said
not in that sense.
That, right?
Yeah. I did say that.
Yeah. So maybe we should.
As far as considering people, what we're talking about is we're talking about whether or not people are allowed participation in some of these areas of society, right?
Should stick to DEI, but just forget about skin color and go to economic class.
Well, it's all of them. It's all of them. You bird-brained weirdo. It is all of those things. This is what happens when the only frame of reference you have for any of these policies is the foaming at the mouth diatribes you get from morons in right-wing circles on the internet or in talk radio or on right-wing cable news. This is absolutely pathetic. Class is considered, so is religion, so is gender. It's not just race. He sucks.
Well, the thing is, how do you find out about economic class, right?
Ask them.
Well, if I say, what's your economic class?
Most people have a good general idea. They say lower class, middle class, upper class.
It depends on, no, this is absolutely wrong. There was a phenomenon for years in Japan. For years. There were massive disparities in certain wealth groups in Japan. But because of the culture, and because of the way economics was discussed in the news, their media, and discussed and sort of transmitted from policymakers and politicians, the vast majority, I don't know if it's the case now, but back when I studied there in the early 2000s, and this was an issue that went into the 90s, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of Japanese, I believe it was well over 94%, when asked what class they were, they all said middle class. Now, some of these people had the ability to take regular trips across the world to Europe. They owned multiple properties in Japan, which was no easy feat. And others were, kind of barely scraping by. They lived with their parents. They didn't have property of their own. They maybe have started a job. And other people, in some cases, they found this unique. People who either didn't go to college and were working service industry jobs. And oftentimes still living in a multi-family home, because that's still something done there, also would describe themselves as middle class. In the United States, an adult person in that situation that got a high school education, did not go to college, was still living with their family in the family home and working maybe a full-time job at a convenience store or at a grocery store or in some kind of retail establishment. They're basically considered that they're suffering from arrested development. That is like a failure to launch by American standards. They would be considered like working class or working poor or something. So he's just trying to, a lot of people have a good sense of this. No, they don't. A lot of people in the United States don't have this either, because very few people in the United States are capable of understanding the difference in purchasing power that a billionaire has versus a merely wealthy person has. Like, they can understand that they themselves are poor and struggling, but they do not really understand that. It's very hard to imagine what it's like to have billions of dollars. It's hard for most people who are working class, who may end up making $1 million, $2 million, maybe even $5 million in the course of their entire life, do not understand what it's like to have that much money on hand right now. And that's just 5 million, not 5 billion, not 50 billion, not 500 billion. $500 billion. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
So there's what, 4 categories?
Or we can even ask for income tax returns.
Well, this is sort of what I'm saying.
This is
right,
what they
about
do
why you
with
ask
universities with getting loans.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying about why you ask about things like postcode, parental income, stuff like that.
The reason they do that at universities, though, is to determine the person's ability to pay loans, and to determine if they're under a certain age. It's to determine the expected amount, unless they've changed some configurations, to determine the expected contribution from the family.
I agree. Like, more information is better for driving these sorts
So
of
we should
decisions.
say, we should look at someone, like if you and I were running a DEI department, we should say, you know what, we really don't care what your skin color is. We need more information. We need to know about your parents, their education.
What's he talking? In order to do what? He still thinks that the DEI department is they're the hiring police, I think.
Where you were raised, that sort of thing.
No,
who cares if
no,
you're
not
black?
that.
Who cares if you're Hispanic? Who cares if you're gay?
No, not that. So
No?
we say, we care if you're gay, we care if you're black, and we care about what your parents earned, and we care about the neighborhood you grew up in, and we care about the access you had.
Why should we care about their skin color if they come from an affluent society?
Because skin color does play a role in certain facts, in terms of ways that people.
Does he really think that skin color is irrelevant in an affluent society?
May have been judged, or like their names being discriminated against on
Yeah,
applications.
but they can handle it. They were raised affluent. If someone calls my son the N-word, he laughs it off.
Oh, okay. But he's aware that a lot of black people are called that word every day and are not from an environment as privileged as his son's.
Yeah, but we're talking about that's great for your son, but
Right, because he comes from an affluent class. So
yeah.
Okay, so we just make everybody rich and then racism goes away. Is that
what class?
I know, but we're making decisions at the population level here, and also because in the
And again, he keeps trying to take something. We're talking about marginalized communities. We're not talking about a marginalized person. He keeps taking any example that Nathan is giving him about looking at marginalized communities and whether or not this group has access to healthcare or amenities or politics or financial resources, job resources, even just food resources in certain cases. I mean, we have areas now that I think a lot of people in the United States would describe as they're just middle class. Like Doug was saying, they're middle class or upper middle class or lower middle class, and are food deserts because you have to own a car in order to and drive. I don't know what's the definition. I think more than 3 miles away in order to get food. Because there's nothing kind of local to you, or there's only the one thing. You just have like, a couple of fast food places and like maybe one corner store or something like that, or, a Walgreens.
in this case, we'd be gathering.
That's racist. We don't make decisions on a population level. That'd be racist. We make decisions on an individual basis.
No,
We do not. What is he talking? It is not racist to make decisions about the entire population that you're dealing with. If what he's saying is true, we should not be talking about preventing immigrants from coming in based on the fact that they're immigrants as a group. We should be reviewing them one by one. Right? I mean, even just talking about undocumented immigrants as a group, well, that's just going to be classist and racist. Then is that what Doug's admitting to? You got to look at their circumstances. You got to find out what they're doing. Doug already knows what every individual though is doing. They're trying to get away with something.
No,
when it comes to DEI,
policies have to be at a population level. You can't have like an institutional policy.
Well, no, the policy is we implement DEI, but when the actual implementation happens, we go on a case by case basis because we can't just say,
what does he think? I mean, this is still not clear to me. He does not understand what the implementation of DEI is. I really do think he thinks it's some kind of barrier to making sure that, well, we want to make sure that when we hire the white person, we didn't commit a racism. I really think he's this stupid. That's not what DEI is.
Oh, you're black.
Unfortunately, there are dum-dums in the corporate world and in parts of the public sector as well that will cynically describe DEI as this. Oh, we're doing that so that we don't look racist. Jesus. Okay. This is how they approach it. As cynically and as stupidly as Doug is.
You must be marginalized. No, you and I both agree. No, we need more. We need to know, well, maybe we were raised in Bel Air. I don't know.
Yeah, so what?
That does not. What we need to know are all the factors before we can award you the prize of being individual prize of being marginalized. That is not the point. This is very, very easy to understand. Native American people, First Nations people who live on reservations, they are marginalized in the sense they do not have access to the same resources and aspects of the society as other groups of people. They tend to be historically poor. They tend to have different health outcomes. The access to healthcare that's just another one. Access to healthcare is remarkably poor. I remember the policy that they had where if you in certain states, it would be if a woman wanted to have an elective abortion, she could do that privately. It was fine. But if she were if she were having that done in a tribal clinic, and I don't remember how long this policy was in place, if she elected to have an unwanted pregnancy terminated, they would sterilize her as well. They didn't do this for anybody else. So you wouldn't look at the person and be like, oh, well, so I guess Doug would say, well, if that happened to that woman, then yes, she was marginalized. That's not how you're supposed to think about it. There's an entire policy that treats this group of people differently than this other group of people here, either legally, socially, culturally, politically, whatever. And it's an out group. It's a lesser than. This is not that tough. But he's trying to come up with this thing like, well, if we're going to implement DEI, implement it to do what? It's not affirmative action.
What I think I've come up with, though, is a way to effectively operationalize useful information about that individual basis. And I think that what you're encouraging is like vibes-based analysis, which is like not as good as having...
No, not vibes. We could actually ask for tax returns, what your parents make, what schools did you go to.
That's what I'm asking for.
Yeah, we're agreed.
Whether or not someone's gay. Right?
Yes, so we're agreed. We don't actually focus on skin.
That wouldn't really get you anywhere. There are plenty of people that went to good schools and maybe came from good parents that fell through the cracks, hit the skids, and they themselves are not in that bracket anymore. It didn't have the continue. I mean, generally it does, but in the same way that he's trying to say, well, that person over there, just because they're non-white doesn't necessarily mean they're marginalized. Well, just because that person is white doesn't mean they're immune from marginalization. And people who understand DEI know that distinction. Doug seems to be the only one here, and again, he's not the only one in this conversation between these two, who's struggling with this because the right wing tells people that's what DEI is. It's reverse discrimination. So now Doug is like, well, actually, I think it would be better to discriminate against people based on their tax return. Well, how do you justify that? Well, if you're Doug, this is what I think. If you're Doug and you see somebody making less money than another person, they've scored less at life, and therefore they can be eliminated from the game faster. So it's just the Matthew principle. Those that gain get more, and those that maintain or lose a little bit, lose it all. Get rid of them.
Skin color, we need more.
We also focus on skin color.
Why?
So do you think that the class... So for example...
No, why? Because
it makes a difference.
No, because if someone can be black and not marginalized, we want to help marginalized people, then we need to figure out what type of black are they? Are they a marginalized black or a non-marginalized black?
Yeah, I agree.
No, that's not. No.
And the information can help us do that, but it's still relevant to have that piece of information.
This is now turned into Doug trying to figure out how to pay out reparations, I feel like. Because this would be the exhausting work of this. Like, well, wait, how do we... Okay, I want to help people, but I only want to help people that deserve it. That's the wrong way to approach it. If you've got a certain percentage, let's say it's Appalachia, right? Appalachia is known for a lot of social problems. Well, let's say that you want to provide them aid. But what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up getting stuck in a conversation with a ghoul like Doug, who wants to wring his hands over what people deserve, rather than doing what you can to improve the situation for the entire group of people there as a whole. Making sure that they have access to medical, and instead of being like, well, wait a minute, some of these people just get access to free eye care, free dental care. The government's going to pay for them? Yeah, because they were neglected for long periods of time. We're going to set up this thing to get in there and make sure that they've got, oral health happening. They're getting optical, their optical health maintained. They're getting regular checkups. They're getting vaccines. I know that, those vaccines are, old school and bougie, but, that's the purpose that you do that. You don't sit there and act like, well, I don't know if they really deserve it or not. That's not the point of delivering those services to people. Deserve's got nothing to do with it.
Because it's also possible for someone to meet certain criteria and be marginalized black, right? And in order to have a picture of that, we need to build up the statistical picture with actual.
But who cares if they're marginalized black and they're wealthy?
That wealth is not the. Okay, this dude has not heard of Black Wall Street. He just hasn't. You had a situation, and people can Google this, when it happened. In fact, I'll Google it right now. Okay, not the movie. Okay, this was Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was the devastation of Black Wall Street. This was in 1921. A wave of racial violence destroys an affluent African-American community seen as a threat to white-dominated American capitalism. Let's get a summary of this. And these people were very, very wealthy, but I'm just following up with what he's talking about here in terms of, well, if they're affluent, then they can't be marginalized. The state of Oklahoma at the time had only 2 airports. 6 black families owned their own planes. This area was doing very, very well for itself. I believe what had kicked this off was a little bit let's see. The underlying cause of this, and it was a massacre, as a result of mass migrations, they were driven apart by increased job opportunities. Tulsa became the city with the most African Americans in the state. With a boom in the black population and their demands for equality, perceptions of discrimination and shared experience among African Americans allowed for little time for adaptation among whites. That's a quote from sociologist Chris Messer. Tulsa's rapid change in racial demographics made the city ripe for a riot motivated by white animosity against black progress. Whites of the era equated improvements in wages and working conditions as communistic threats. In essence, whites were resentful that blacks no longer passively accepted second-class citizenship in their own homeland. So there was segregation going on. There was a final tipping point that kicked this off. When the riots started, eyewitnesses claimed that the area was bombed with kerosene and or nitroglycerin, causing an inferno to rage. Aggressively, official accounts say that the private planes were on reconnaissance missions. They were surveying the area to see what happened. The police disregarded due process, arresting blacks and interning them in detention camps. Meanwhile, no whites were arrested. They destroyed the white rioters that did this, killed an enormous number of people and destroyed this town. Their affluence didn't mean a thing. In fact, their affluence was what needed to go.
I care, and you're asking me about my policies. So.
No. I mean, like for that individual. So let's say my son
was marginalized, black, and wealthy.
Yeah, and you talk to my son, and
I'd like your son to have better outcomes rather than worse outcomes.
Yeah. But you say to my son, "Oh, by the way, you're black in society, so you're marginalized in some extent." And my son goes, "I don't care."
Yeah, and I'd say, well, you're PineCreek's son, so of course you'd say that.
Yeah, but if he's not being hurt psychologically by being marginalized, if he grows up to be upper middle class and he's just fine, and he's still considered marginalized, who cares if he's marginalized at that point?
Well,
it's not about his personal perception, and the psychological impact of it is only one dimension of marginalization.
It depends on what the policy actually says in particular, right? But I can conceive of cases where this really would matter. So, for example, if we were thinking about like stop and search by the police, like being pulled over or something like that, I think it would be pretty important because the police officer who
the police love my son. Did I tell you the story? He got pulled over the other night.
Fantastic. You keep talking about your kid as if your kid represents the entire group. Marginalization is about the group. It's about the a collective whole. It's about how these groups are being treated on average. Your kid, from the sounds of it, and I think Doug is happy about this, is not average. But he's trying to say, well, because he's the exception, he can be the rule. No, that doesn't follow at all. This is just fallacious thinking.
12 midnight. I told him, don't drive after midnight because nothing good happens after midnight. He got pulled over. He was wearing makeup because he just came from the theater, like not girly makeup, but just makeup. You know, he's a real man. Yeah. And so imagine this. He went through a yellow light, gets pulled over because it was like close, and rolls down the window, and here he is. My son's looking kind of weird because he has this makeup on and he's black, and he ended up, he and the officer had a great talk, and he invited the officer to come to his next show. My son was trained properly on how to deal in those situations. My son is charismatic. He knows how to talk. He's respectful. All these things. He's not marginalized. I dare the cops to pull him over. I mean, they'll end up loving him.
He's not marginalized because he didn't have a bad encounter with a cop that pulled him over for a traffic stop. This guy is supposed to be good at critical thinking, and he just made that. Oh, he can't be marginalized because there was this one time he got pulled over by a cop, and the cop was really nice to him, and they hit it off great.
I mean, have you looked at?
Regardless of what his son like, so is that on account of the fact that he was lucky and that cop just happened to be easygoing? But no, it's because his son's been trained how to deal with these situations, and he's charismatic. Okay, so if those were the things that were necessary in order to make that traffic stop go well for him, if just following this horrible logic to its conclusion, if he weren't charismatic and weren't properly prepared for that situation, does he deserve what he gets? Would he deserve that? Would he deserve to be abused by the cop because he didn't understand how to talk to a cop in advance, given his skin color, and he lacked charisma? Well, I guess he just deserved the tasing and the beating and the trip to jail. And I don't know, how bad can it be?
Like the statistics of how many black people
that's not because they're black. It's because they weren't raised well.
How have you figured that out from the data?
I mean, this is what he's saying. So, okay, they're not raised well, so they deserve it. That's the logical, like if he's trying to make this, like he's laughing about this, but if he's trying to make this as a logical point, like if his kid did not have those abilities, he deserved to be abused by that cop because he didn't handle himself.
That's not what the data say.
Well, you actually agree with that when I say things like you can't just judge someone as being marginalized by their skin color.
You're not supposed to be talking about individuals being marginalized in the first place. I mean, you can in the sense that a person is going to experience certain hardships and differences in the way that they interact with society because they come from a marginalized group from multiple different dimensions. But sitting here and trying to fret over like, God, I wonder if Todd really is marginalized, or maybe he's not totally marginalized, or maybe he's only 40% marginalized. This is useless. Absolutely useless.
Because you don't know things like how they're raised, how they've been educated, how they know how to react in certain situations.
So they have it coming. He's been talking to Nate this entire time to get to the point where some people just got it coming to them because they suck.
Right? You have to take a case by case basis.
Right. Some of them just, they weren't born with the right parents that could teach them this stuff. They don't naturally have any charisma, and they didn't Google how to make friends and influence people. Maybe they don't know how to Google. The moron, they deserve to have their hands broken and their faces kicked in. Loser piece of shit. Is this not where he's going with this? This is absolute trash thinking. Oh, no. We have to take those all into consideration in order to do what, Doug? To determine who deserves it. My son deserves more things because I gave him more things. So he deserves even more. Those people that didn't have a lot and can't do much with what little they have deserve to lose everything. They've got it coming. Okay, I'm not listening to that shit. That is absolutely ridiculous. Holy shit. Nathan told me in the live chat of my last live video that I was doing, he said, yeah, I talked to Doug, he sucks. And he did. That is absolute trash thinking. Like, if you can evaluate somebody's thought processes, that is crap thinking. Holy crap. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to call it good. Thank you for checking this out. This is going to be a live premiere. So if you've been in the live chat, thank you for seeing it live. Like, subscribe, share, comment, do all that stuff, or don't. Any suggestions or comments or anything, you can reach me at jeffersonspatchcock@gmail.com. I'm going to get out of here. I will see you in the next video.